Ready to dive into a bit of legend and history.
I'm in.
Today we're unpacking the story of DaMo, a name you hear all the time with martial arts, Shaolin Kung Fu, all of that.
It's interesting because, when you really look into DaMo, you realize he's more than just a martial arts figure.
Right.
He really represents this bridge between physical discipline and then also spiritual enlightenment.
Yeah, and he's almost mythical in a way.
Right.
But our goal today is, can we navigate through the myths and figure out what was his real impact, both on Shaolin Kung Fu, but then also Chan Buddhism?
Right.
Did he meditate for 9 years staring at a wall?
Right.
What's the deal with the red snow? We're going to unpack all of that.
Well, and to really kind of grasp his influence, I think it's important to understand the world that he entered, right? So even before he arrives in China, Buddhism is already making its way from India eastward.
So, okay, set the stage for us. What was happening in China?
Okay, so picture like 5th century.
Okay.
Buddhism slowly making its way eastward from India. And one of the pivotal figures in all of this is a monk named Bhadrabhadra. He's better known in China as simply Boar.
Boar, okay. Now, is there a Shaolin Temple connection here?
You're catching on quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, so he arrives in China around 464 AD. After decades of teaching, he's actually honored by the emperor with the establishment of, you guessed it, the Shaolin Temple.
So the Shaolin Temple, which we think of as being like synonymous with martial arts,
Right.
predates DaMo.
That's right.
Interesting, okay. What was that like in the early days?
It was much different than I think the image many people have today. It was established as a peaceful sanctuary for these Buddhist teachings to take root. And instead of focusing on combat skills or anything like that, this was really about, okay, how do we allow these teachings to grow and flourish? And it isn't until DaMo's arrival that the connection between meditation and martial arts starts to really take shape.
Okay.
And let's just say DaMo wasn't entirely pleased with the state of Chinese Buddhism at the time.
Oh, what didn't he like?
He felt like it strayed too far from its essence. He believed they were too focused on rituals, on scriptures.
It's like they missed the point.
They were missing kind of the heart of the practice. And so he was really advocating for a more direct path to enlightenment.
Interesting.
Something less about outward forms, more about internal cultivation.
Less talk, more meditation.
Right. It's exactly.
I sound bored of that.
And you can imagine this didn't exactly make him the most popular guy around.
I was going to say, I'm sure not everyone was thrilled with that take.
Exactly. So his methods were definitely unconventional for the time. And there's this great encounter between DaMo and Emperor Wu, right? So the emperor, very proud of the temples he had built, the Buddhist texts that he had helped translate, all of this. And he asked DaMo about, well, what about your teachings? And DaMo, in a moment of refreshing candor, replies, I have not brought even one word.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a bold answer.
It's a testament to his commitment to his beliefs. And the emperor, perhaps surprisingly, instead of punishing him, lets him go. Maybe he sensed a deeper wisdom beneath those words. But this wasn't the only instance where DaMo ruffled some feathers.
Okay.
There's a story of his first encounter with Shen Guang.
Okay.
This is the monk who would eventually become his disciple.
Okay.
But DaMo's kind of silent observation of Shen Guang's teachings leads to a very memorable confrontation.
Now you have to tell me more about this confrontation. What happened?
Well, it involved thrown prayer beads, a demonstration of incredible restraint on DaMo's part. But ultimately, it highlighted his steadfast focus.
Okay.
And so, following that encounter, DaMo is said to have traveled north. And this is where we get to one of the most enduring images associated with him, and that's the image of him crossing the Yangtze River on a single reed stalk.
Hold on, wait, he just floated across on a reed. Like, what are we supposed to take away from that? Is it a miracle? Was it a metaphor? Was it just a really sturdy reed? Like, what are we talking about here?
It's a question that's been debated for centuries, but whether it's a historical event or a symbolic tale, the image is undeniably powerful. It speaks to this idea of DaMo possessing this almost superhuman ability to transcend the ordinary.
Yeah.
And it's a theme that runs throughout his story. And so it's right after this, right, that he arrives at the Shaolin Temple, forever kind of entwining his path with this legendary place.
Okay. It's at the Shaolin Temple that he settles in for, the legendary meditation, right?
Yeah.
9 years in a cave facing a wall. I mean,
It's a long time.
It's a long time. I get fidgety after 20 minutes, let alone 9 years. But even putting that aside, like, was it literally 9 years? What are we supposed to take away from this story?
Well, it speaks to, I think, something we all struggle with, right? And that's this idea of just focus, dedication in its purest form.
Hmm.
So DaMo's 9 years, whether literal or symbolic, represent this complete immersion in practice, this deliberate shedding of all distractions to reach kind of a heightened state of awareness.
Yeah, it's such a powerful image, especially today, right? When we're
Yeah.
just constantly bombarded with distractions,
Yeah.
phones, jobs, to-do lists, like we're trained to be pulled in a million directions.
And so the cave itself becomes almost like a character in the story, right? And there are all these legends, right, about DaMo leaving a body imprint on the wall, almost like a physical manifestation of this intense, focused energy.
Wait, a body imprint? That seems like a bit much, even for legend.
Of course, most likely a myth.
Okay.
But that doesn't make it any less fascinating. Right. The idea that his presence was so potent, so transformative, that it literally left a physical mark on the world. It speaks to this idea of the depth of his commitment to this inward journey.
It's almost like a visual representation that, like, dedication leaves a mark, right?
Right.
Even if we can't see it.
Exactly.
And that makes me think of another legend, which is the one about DaMo and the tea plant.
Oh, yes, the origins of tea.
The origins of tea, right. So the story goes that he cuts off his eyelids, right?
To stay awake.
To stay awake during these long meditations.
Right.
And they fall to the ground, and where they land, a tea plant sprouts up.
Which is why, to this day, tea holds such a significance in Zen practice.
Exactly. It's more than just a beverage at that point.
Exactly.
It's the symbol of wakefulness
Right.
and focus.
Clarity of mind.
It makes you appreciate your next cup a little bit more. You know what I mean?
It does.
But we can't forget about Shen Guang, this monk who had the very, shall we say, memorable first encounter with DaMo. What's he up to while DaMo's doing his thing in the cave?
Well, Shen Guang was utterly devoted to becoming DaMo's disciple. I mean, imagine waiting outside of a cave for years, through harsh winters, scorching summers, just for a chance to learn from this enigmatic master. And instead that during a particularly heavy snowfall, Shen Guang stood for so long, so determined to prove his commitment, that the snow covered his arms up to his elbows.
That's dedication, man. I complain when the wifey's down for 5 minutes. But you mentioned earlier that Shen Guang chops off his arm.
Yes, and this is a rather intense part of the story.
Right.
After years of waiting, Shen Guang, feeling ignored by DaMo, decides to do something quite drastic to get his attention.
Okay.
A truly, truly extreme act of devotion. Let's just say the snow that day turned red.
Okay, that's that's an image.
It is.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Like, what would possess somebody to go to such lengths?
It speaks to this incredible depth of commitment that Shen Guang had. He was willing to go to extremes to prove his sincerity, right? His hunger for knowledge, for enlightenment. And it was this act, as shocking as it might seem, that finally convinced DaMo to accept him as a disciple. And from that point on, Shen Guang was known as Huike. So it really marked a new chapter in his life.
So we've got years of meditation, a body imprint in a cave, tea plant origin story, self-inflicted amputation, all before we even get to the martial arts.
You're right. It's a lot to unpack.
It's a lot.
And it's right here where the story takes another fascinating turn.
Yeah.
Because it starts to bridge that gap, right, between the physical and the spiritual. You see, DaMo observed that while the monks were very dedicated to their spiritual practice, they were physically weak.
Okay.
And so to address this, he introduces a series of exercises designed to strengthen their bodies and their minds.
And are these exercises, is this the beginnings of what we know now as Shaolin Kung Fu?
That's the prevailing theory. These exercises, which became known as the 18 Liuhan hands, weren't about fighting in the traditional sense.
Okay.
They were about cultivating and harnessing qi.
So this is where we see that connection to Qigong,
Exactly.
which I always find fascinating. It's about more than just the movements, right?
Precisely. Qigong is often described as moving meditation. So it's about integrating breath, movement, and mindful awareness to cultivate and balance that qi, that vital energy that flows through the body.
It's so holistic.
It is.
It makes you realize that DaMo's impact wasn't just physical prowess or even enlightenment. It's like this understanding that the two are connected.
You've hit the nail on the head. DaMo didn't see the body and the mind as separate. He saw them as two sides of the same coin. So cultivating physical health was really a pathway to strengthening the mind and the spirit.
Which, again, so relevant even today, right? We want to put things in a box. It's like, this is my physical health, this is my mental health, this is my spiritual side. But DaMo's approach is like, no, these are all interwoven.
They influence each other.
They influence each other. So how do we get from these early exercises, this focus on ki and internal energy, to what we know of as Shaolin Kung Fu today, with the movements, the fighting techniques?
Right.
Was DaMo, like, secretly a martial arts master, like the Bruce Lee of his time?
It's a question that sparked a lot of debate. And while DaMo's influence is undeniable, I think it's important to remember that Shaolin Kung Fu as we know it today evolved over centuries. So he provided that spark, that initial inspiration, but it was really generations of monks who came after him that built upon those foundations, added their own innovations, their own techniques.
So a gradual evolution, but with his teachings as a guiding principle.
Exactly. Think of it like a tree.
Okay.
He planted the seed, he nurtured the roots, but the branches, the leaves, the fruit, those all came later and the tree grew as it adapted to its environment.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of things passed down through time, there's the question of, did DaMo leave behind any written manuals?
Right.
Because there are those texts that are attributed to him, the Yi Jin Jing and the Shi Su Jing. What do we know about them?
Yeah, these texts, they're often translated as the muscle tendon changing classic and the marrow brainwashing classic.
Okay.
They're fascinating.
Yeah.
Right? And they really focus on strengthening the body, cultivating internal energy, enhancing vitality, concepts that are really central to both Qigong and Shaolin Kung Fu.
I mean, the titles alone, it sounds like something out of a martial arts movie. But if they're lost, I mean, how do we even know what they said or if he wrote them?
It's one of these enduring mysteries surrounding DaMo. The authorship is debated, and we only really have fragments, interpretations passed down through lineages, through oral traditions.
Okay.
But even if those specific texts are gone, that essence, that emphasis on harmonizing mind and body, it's so deeply woven into the fabric of Shaolin Kung Fu.
It makes you wonder what DaMo would think of how his teachings have evolved.
Right.
And spread.
Right.
I mean, Shaolin Kung Fu is a global phenomenon at this point.
It speaks to the enduring power of his ideas. And it's not just the physical aspect, right? Remember, DaMo is also considered the father of Chan Buddhism in China, which later becomes Zen Buddhism in Japan.
Right, with its emphasis on direct experience, meditation, a much more, I don't know, I guess you could say radical departure from what was happening at the time in Buddhism.
Absolutely, yeah.
He was shaking things up in both the physical and the spiritual realm.
He challenged the norms, right? He pushed people to look inward for their own answers.
Yeah.
Their own path to enlightenment. He didn't offer these easy answers. He didn't rely on dogma. He really encouraged people to experience truth for themselves directly through practice and self-discovery.
Which leads us to, I think, one final legend we have to touch on, which is the story of DaMo's death.
Right.
Or should we say his supposed death? This whole empty coffin mystery.
The mystery of the one shoe.
One shoe, okay.
So it's said that after a long, impactful life, DaMo dies at the impressive age of 150.
Okay.
He's buried.
All right.
But then, an interesting twist. An official traveling to India claims to have encountered DaMo along the way, very much alive and well.
Hold on. So he didn't die. Did he get a picture or something? An autograph?
Well, he did offer one intriguing detail. Okay. DaMo was said to be carrying a single shoe.
A single shoe? That's going to raise some eyebrows.
To say the least. People were skeptical, you can imagine, but also very curious. So they decided to open DaMo's tomb to see what was what.
Was he just chilling out in there, reading a book, having some tea?
Not quite. The tomb was empty, except for, you guessed it, a single shoe.
You're kidding me. That's quite an exit. But what's the significance of the shoe? There's got to be something deeper there.
Like most legends, it's open to interpretation.
Right.
But I think if you connect it back to that story of Shen Guang's sacrifice.
Okay.
Right? Shen Guang cut off his arm to demonstrate his unwavering devotion to DaMo.
Right.
The single shoe left behind. Maybe it's a similar symbol, a testament to the lengths that one might go to in pursuit of enlightenment. A reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys require, well, extraordinary commitment.
Wow. That's a pretty profound way to look at a lost shoe. It really brings this whole story full circle. So we've journeyed from India to the Shaolin Temple. We've explored ancient legends, unpacked some fascinating historical insights. If we had to sum up DaMo's legacy, what would it be?
I think his story is really a testament to the power of human potential. He challenged norms, he broke boundaries, he urged us to look inward to discover our own strength and our own wisdom. And I think he reminds us that the journey of self-discovery is often unconventional. It demands dedication, discipline, a willingness to kind of push beyond those perceived limits.
Beautifully said. It makes you think about the power of one person, right? To spark an idea, a practice, a way of life that continues to resonate centuries later.
And for all of us listening, it kind of poses this question. What will your legacy be? What seeds of change, what acts of dedication might you plant today that could ripple outward and shape the future in ways that you can't even imagine? That's something worth thinking about.
That's something worth thinking about. That's going to do it for this deep dive. We'll be back next time with more.